Good morning. It's actually going to be, it's quite an interesting topic that we're looking at this morning. The business case for fiber deployment. At first glance, quite simple. If you delve in and you flesh it out, you quickly see, but listen, this industry have evolved the past, I would say, 2010, 29, to where we are now, the last 9 years, to be a really involved industry. So it should maybe have been better to ask the business case in a specific sector of this industry. Well, we probably doesn't have the time for that in any case this morning. So what we will try this morning is to make it interesting, and I would really like the audience to participate, to try to flesh out, the next panel discussion is why do you invest into a fiber, into this industry? To flesh out even for them, to lay the groundwork and to say why would somebody invest, do a fresh investment, or continue to invest into this industry. I've got on the panel, and they will introduce themselves, I've got Simon Harvey from FiberCo. I've got Suvir from Seacom, Suvir Ramdani, and I've got JP Kraus from Vulatel. So, Simon, over to you. What do you guys do?
Thanks, everyone. Simon Harvey. From a FiberCo point of view, we built a long-distance network in the very beginning, in the early days, and we've evolved onto metro fiber as well as access fiber. And the business cases are quite different in terms of those three different areas. Certainly when we first built the long-distance network, we managed to de-risk most of the requirements up front. And I think that made the business case a lot easier to digest from the investors. And certainly one of the biggest things that we did is we understood the cost of construction. And the cost of construction is probably the biggest input into the business case. And on that basis, we understood that we needed to get more cost or reduced cost. And the way that we did that was through infrastructure sharing. So the business case for long-distance fiber was de-risked in our point of view from doing infrastructure sharing. When it comes to metro and when it comes to access, that becomes a little bit more difficult, but still the same aspects apply. The more you can share infrastructure, the lower your cost comes. And we found that to be one of the biggest influences in making sure that our kind of balance sheets stayed strong going forward.
Suvir, maybe for the audience, a little bit more about Suvir and your position at Seacom, sure. And then Seacom's current positioning in the market.
Sure, absolutely. Wow, this is a really dark, massive hallway with just two beams of light at the end. This is how optical fiber works. Suvir, let's start with Suvir. Suvir is a Fortnite addict. And Suvir at Seacom is responsible for strategy and acquisitions and a lot of the investment cases. And so let's talk about some of those business cases. And I think especially with the buzz that's taken place in the fiber to the home, the fiber to the business market over the last couple of years. I live this intimately, being sort of a strategy background. I live by PowerPoints and Excel and those sorts of things, but I'd like to think I have a flair for walking the streets as well. So when one looks at telecoms business cases, remember there's two fundamentals. There's project finance on the one side, and then of course there's building up recurring income model on the other. And both of these have fundamentally different risks. What Simon just described was project finance, where he de-risked the business to the start. CCOM did very much the same thing. We spent $300 million. We had, on day one, we already had $150, $200 million worth of contracts, where we just collected the cash up, so the business was de-risked. So globally, if you look at CCOM as a private cable system, we're probably one of two privately owned submarine cable systems that have been profitable. So the submarine business is very difficult to run. And that's what pushed us very quickly into diversification, away from just the submarine infrastructure, into a diversification of our routes, into long distance routes between city to city, and then last mile fiber. But then it takes us into the different business model where you're trying to build up recurring income over a period of time. And coming back to the buzz in the market over the last few years, it's not that easy a business case because of the gravity effect in telecoms. The gravity effect in telecoms is a shortcut to understand whether your business is going to be successful or not. It's similar to the laws of physics and gravity. You have two populations. The larger the population, the more traffic flow. The closer the populations, the more traffic flow. And the positive aspects of that from a business perspective is the closer the population, the less the capex costs. So if you factor all that together, what you have is revenue density, which is fundamentally your ARPUs as well as your penetration rates on per kilometer passed. If you don't get that right, your payback periods push out to 3 years, then 4 years, and 5 years, whilst you're collecting this recurring income, which means that you will struggle to fund future capex projects. Then why have other businesses been successful versus some smaller? Is that when you begin to consolidate and have a large scale of network, your maintenance costs don't grow with the size of your network. There's no linear relationship between maintenance and the size of your network, which means you then have more cash dropping to the bottom line and you're more successful, which is why islands of fiber, if you look at the 2000s, the early 2000s in the US, you had many businesses that were islands of fiber, ultimately got consolidated into the likes of a Level 3 and so forth. Of course, they then struggled a bit, and the likes of Azeo came along, and they started consolidating more of these islands of fiber to create a superco. What do you achieve when you create a superco? You achieve higher ARPUs. You're not just leasing out the fiber, you're getting other revenue forms on top of it, whilst you're getting your maintenance costs down. That's my nutshell intro.
Sure. Severe, that was, there's enough food for thought there for probably 2 hours of discussion. Thank you for that. JP, Vulatel, relatively new on the market. So first of all, who's JP? And then secondly, this new kid on the block. Where you guys going? What have you done? I mean, we all know that's in the industry. You bought what we knew in the industry as Plessy from Didi. And now going forward, where's Vulatel going and where's JP going?
Okay, thanks Frans. So guys, JP Kraus, I'm the managing director of the Vulatel Group. We bought, as you said, Plessy. I think the right word to answer is DDI, fiber and wireless business. And I think the first question will be is, why did we do it? If you look at the entity that you're going to buy, and there's actually a couple of us who were interested in this business, there were 6 of us that wanted to acquire the assets. It's exactly what they are, what you're buying. It's the fiber and the wireless business of footstep into the market. And that's exactly where we want to go to. We all dealt with Plessy in the olden days from a Vodacom point of view, from a Dark Fiber Africa point of view. And we saw it lucrative from what they were doing as planning, designing, and building and maintaining the infrastructure. Why doing that? There's existing customer bases on that. I think the diversification between the fiber and the wireless is always space for both of them in the markets. That was crucially important for us. And they build a hell of a lot of towers in Africa for a lot of the operators being in the room today. So currently what we were doing is maintaining infrastructure of larger operators and ISPs, customers sitting on right to my left here. Both of you guys are customers of ours. The expansion portion we want to go to is, well, we made another acquisition, is Geoconstruction and Geologistics. We acquired that 4 months ago. Acquired 90% of their business, 10% back to the management, and the reason will be why. Plessy was geared for long-haul maintenance and construction and metro construction, but Geo is more predominant in metro areas. It's complementary from where we're going to roll out. I think I'll leave the last portion for a bit later, for one of the questions you want to ask, otherwise I'm going to rumble a bit too much already. So that's us.
Simon, I know you were undercover here, so you missed the part of who is Simon Harvey.
Don't you know Simon?
Who do we deal here with?
I joined Fiberco in the startup, so I've been in telecommunications specifically for some 8 years. But previous to that, I was more in consulting. I was working for Deloitte Consulting in London for a while, and then my kind of transition into Fiberco came from Dimension Data. So Dimension Data was one of the shareholders, and I was seconded to this kind of startup called Fiberco at the time. So my experience in the industry is quite short in relative terms, but enjoying it all the same.
Sure, I beg to differ. I think most of us is about, you call yourself a long timer if you in this industry for about 2 years now. You know, you've got your scars in your back, I believe. Souvier, you say Seacom is one of the few marine cable operators that's profitable. Why, in circumstances like that, are we seeing more and more competition coming on board? I believe we will soon have, end of 2020, we will have 6 cables connecting South Africa. We see major upgrades in SAT3. We've seen an increase, if I can quote Dobek from yesterday, we'll be close to have to capacity of 12 terabits per second soon. Where's it going? Who's going to make money? Who's going to lose out? What's the investor business case for the latecomers, if you can call them that?
Yeah, I think
new entrants.
No, thanks, Frans. I think it's an important observation because let's start off with there is no business case. So the people that are building these cable systems are not building these cable systems because they plan to recover their capital and make money out of it. And I think let's just pause on that because it sounds like an irrational statement. And take a step back and reflect on telecoms at large. Telecoms at large is just being reinvented as we speak. And whilst we and many people in this audience are so focused on fiber to the home and fiber to the business, perhaps very often in startup mode, let's take a big step back and look at what's happening at large mobile operators, large fixed line operators. Their business models are being changed for them, whether they like it or not. We're all trying to do business with the OTTs at the same time being at war with the OTTs. And you know, if you look at the Google projects and the Facebook projects where they're actually building their own vendor, they're just throwing Cisco and Juniper and the guys like that out of the door. They're building their own routers, they're building their own SDH, their own kinds of optical equipment as well. Sorry, I shouldn't have referenced SDH because they're not using SDH, right? So they're reinventing telecoms, and there's going to be a new model in 20 years' time. So you can see how these behemoths are just beginning to slowly take over the world. And I think it's because of the ability to monetize eyeballs rather than monetize megabits that these cables are being built. Now, having said that, one would consider that a major threat to the CCOM cable system as an example, and potentially it is. It's also a potential collaboration for us, because many of the people in the audience are in fact our customers. As you go downstream and you build the connectivity into businesses and homes, do you really want to be involved in building Joburg to Cape Town, and then Cape Town to London? That's where we come together and we...
Oops, sorry.
That's a mic drop.
Yeah, that's a mic drop. Luckily, it's not me.
And that's where we come together as partners with you to help penetrate those end users. So whilst that overriding transformation is affecting our industry, we still have this window of opportunity where we can collaborate, grow the market, service the underserviced, and monetize that. Frankly, whilst the big boys sort out who's going to win this fight.
I'm sure there's going to be quite a few questions out of the audience on that statement, and it's actually extremely interesting for me as well. How will this landscape look in the next 20 years? But we'll get to that. In the shorter run, you've got a major investment in CCOM. So yeah. Surely your revenues must either stay stable or actually start declining. What is your current situation? Because we're dealing, if we look at access data, we're looking at a commodity that's dropping, the price points are dropping so fast. We saw yesterday a nice graph up here. 2014 as 100%, we're standing at 2018 at 75%. That's the retail pricing per bit, if we sell a bit. How does that affect, in the short run, the investment of CCOM?
So first and foremost, CCOM, as we primarily think of it, as an undersea cable system, is a business that's very stable. And without a doubt, the price declines have been dramatic. It's, Simon and I talk about this a lot, because it's the same things applied to national routes. Prices have been falling 30-40% year on year. However, that's the beauty of fiber economics, because we can follow that with additional capacity, right? And to this day, CCOM still is only operating about 10% of its potential capacity. So we've got a long way to go before we really run out. So that business is stable, and like I said, it supports the customers within this very audience. And as they see downstream demand from home users as well as business users, we'll pick up that traffic and we'll monetize that traffic. But what's really going on here? There's two camps. There's the challengers, which is primarily this audience, and there's the incumbents. So the incumbents, I'd throw in Telkom/BCX, and that merge has done us all a tremendous favor, with their inability to react to customer needs and so forth, and that's what we do best. Then there's also the likes of MTN Business, and I'd like to throw Vodacom Business in there, but they're actually pretty good at what they do. So my point being is, whilst these large operators are trying to defend market share, they don't even notice when they lose 1%, right? But when we gain 1%, that's something like a 60% IRR. It's a tremendous business opportunity for us. And that's what we're all actually doing here collectively. Taking on the incumbents and growing from their loss of market share. Because if one takes a step back and looks at the total market, it's not growing. The total market is flat. Unit prices are coming down, but volumes are going up, and the total market is therefore flat. It's this dynamic between the incumbent and the challengers that's creating an opportunity to shift value from one set of shareholders to another set of shareholders.
Simon, FiberCo is dealing with exactly the same challenges that Suvir laid out for us. You're also operating in a deflationary environment. How do FiberCo handle those challenges?
So I guess similar to what Suvir said is that our fiber has got huge amounts of capacity on it. untapped capacity. And on that basis, when we sell fiber, whenever we build a network, we make sure we've got enough fiber in the ground to be able to sell it. But from a capacity point of view, we could light up terabits just by adding additional equipment. I mean, one fiber strand could get 10 plus terabits on it. So from that point of view, we also try as hard as we can to make sure that whenever there's a decline in revenue, which is inevitable on the capacity side of things, that we make it up with an increase in capacity. So whether we add additional services or whether we increase the actual capacity, so in other words, add another route or just plainly increase the capacity on the route that they have, that's the way that we try and protect our revenue going forward. But again, I guess FiberCo is in a good place that it's got a strong balance sheet and it's got a strong investment outlook. And on that basis, we're able to invest in other areas that we think are going to add revenue to the company going forward. So it's that diversity of investment that helps us.
We will definitely come back to that. JP, you operating in a slightly, or Vulatel operating is operating in a slightly different part of the value chain. I believe, and you must please correct me if I'm wrong, your major income stream currently is building and maintaining. Have I got it correct? Is it building as well and maintaining?
Absolutely.
And am I correct to say that you do that for also people in this audience and maybe even the gentleman sitting here? How do you see that business model? And explain to us a little bit about Vulatel and how you approach this market and your vision.
Sure. You're 100% correct, Frans. If you look at any business, it's imperative to have a nice constant annuity model, which is the maintenance portion of the business. And on the CapEx side of the business, the planning and the building is crucial coming in. But the planning is an absolute vital portion, because you will see entities now are reducing their planning environments. And if you look at the gents to our left, we're talking about just lighting more fiber. It's not always as easy as that from your type of fiber that you want to deploy. Is it the FTTH customer? Is it the FTTX customer? Once the trench is dug and you put your fiber in, it's not always easy to go and break it out and your layered architecture in there. But anyway, so back to the point on that, we really saw the business case as lucrative in supporting these major operators. It's always going to be the first portion, which is the construction, and you need the skill set and the equipment and the establishment thereof. It's quite a big investment initially, so we see ourselves as expertise in that. And the maintenance portion is the real annuity model that ticks the bank and makes everybody pay. The big thing that I still see, and Severe, sorry, I don't totally agree to that one statement where you say there's no linear regression to the maintenance portion of. I think if all the investors go and take their own investment and you roll it out for 20 years, and you look at the exposure of the maintenance of your infrastructure at that stage, it's becoming a big problem for a lot of guys currently in the country and in the market. So, and that's why we positioned ourselves as Vulatel, Vula being open in Zulu, that to service those customers.
Let's drill in on that for a moment.
Sure.
If you have an investor sitting out there and he's busy doing his due diligence on a new business plan, new investment, new proposal, how should what sort of guidelines can you give him in terms of maintenance? And I don't know what will be the easiest way to define maintenance. Will we define it as percentage of revenue? Should we define it as a percentage of your initial capital spend? But what's the view, your practical experience on a network that's now 9 years old? Your network is older, but maybe it's not comparable because you've got different challenges, I assume. What's your sort of budget in terms of a well-designed, proper executed fiber build?
Asking me?
I'm asking, I'm
I'll
opening
take
it
it.
up.
Yeah,
So
let's start
in
with-
fact,
Let's start with him so we can use it against him in the next
yeah.
If you look at firstly, there's a fixed portion element because you're servicing an SLA. At the end of your own fiber infrastructure, there's a customer with needs and don't interrupt him while he's working on the environment. You agree? So, and that comes at a cost. It doesn't matter if your fiber is live the whole time, you still need an individual in a vehicle with splicing equipment and testing equipment to be there. And that comes at a cost. So if you take it back to your question of is it a percentage of investment, I'm going to ask you at which year after your investment. If you look at the fiber infrastructure, and I call it the honeymoon phase, if you don't have a lot of customers on the network, that's easy because there's no congestion. And as soon as you get to a penetration ratio of 30 and 40 and 50%, to go and work in that environment is really not so easy. So coming back to the point, what we're doing to our customers, we offer them a sliding scale. Not about the investment portion, just the information of your network. So where's your GIS information? Show us your splicing instructions. Now, if you don't have that embedded in your entity, you're really not looking after your asset. So that's how we start, and if the information is forthcoming, you can really reduce the customer's costing due to a much quicker SLA. I think the fact finding, last week Friday, we had the break in a place called Toastrophy. And if you see the pictures at 4 o'clock in the morning, the landscape when you deployed your fiber is totally different a couple of years later. We had to dig 4 meters to get to the specific angle. I need to find that the GIS information was 4 meters to the left or 4 meters to the right, and that's becoming really, really relevant for us. So maintenance, you can drop it if your input information is kept up to date.
I don't want to let these two gentlemen with more
Ask me a difficult
experience
question, Frans.
off the hook. Give us a guideline.
Price?
No, a guideline, because I mean price is a difficult one. We need to relate it to something. So say we've got an investor sitting here and he's looking at this business plan, and obviously he's been invited to invest in a startup that's now putting in fiber. I think it's happening all the time. Obviously, I've seen many of those business plans. They look wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And many of them do not even have a budget for maintenance in them, believe it or not. And if there are investors here that's looking at business plans right now, ask yourself, do they have a budget for maintenance? How do you budget looking at a new startup project? And maybe part and parcel of that question is, what timelines do you look at? Do you look at 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? What's our timelines that we look at fiber and fiber deployments? But give us a guideline. What should investors look at?
Simon, do you want to go first?
Yeah, no, I'll go first. Certainly in the business cases that we look at, we have a longer term view. So we certainly look at a 10-year view for business cases that we put forward when we roll out fiber. And we're quite fortunate in that the business cases that we look at are usually breaking off of our national network. So whenever we look at that, we always have an understanding of what maintenance we've got at the moment on our network, and suppliers like Jackie who manage our network have a very little additional cost to maintain something that is just a few meters away from the network. And on that basis, we've got a better understanding of how much it's going to cost to manage that network going forward. And so from a daily point of view, or from a kind of normal business as usual maintenance, we would have a good understanding, and we would keep that going over a period of time, and we would add some kind of an inflationary amount to that, because we all understand that even though capacity is coming down, infrastructure costs are going up. So to be prudent, we add it in there. We don't always pay it, but we add it in there. And but we've got an understanding that stuff happens. I mean, that break in Tosofi, it was a significant break, and there's going to be a lot of costs to actually repair that permanently. And so one needs to add contingency to the maintenance going forward. You certainly do need to understand that temporary repairs are just that, they're temporary. And permanent repairs do need to be implemented to maintain your network at a high quality. So whenever you're doing the business case, you have your maintenance as usual, but you certainly have to budget for permanent repairs going forward. We do, on our network, we've got a significant area in that a lot of our network runs in SANRAL road reserves. And on that basis, SANRAL has this tendency to widen the road or move the road. And on that basis, we could move 40 kilometers of fiber at a time because SANRAL wants to move their road. So those kind of things we certainly do have in our budget going forward, and it's a prudent thing to do.
Sophia?
Yes, it depends on what kind of network you're talking about, and I think that's a really good example for long distance. Submarines, a bit more exciting. We have ships that we dock in harbors across the continent, and we share the costs of these ships that are literally on standby. So we just pay, docking fees, and we try to share that with a number of the other cable consortiums out there. But I think perhaps, your question, I'm reading between the lines, it's kind of more last mile.
Yes.
So then the question then is, what is maintenance? And how does maintenance work? And like Simon pointed out, some of the stuff's just not planned, so you can't really, you need a contingency budget, but it's really, when something bad goes, and you can't really plan for that, you just need a bit of contingency, and you'll probably some years not spend the budget, and other years you'll blow the budget. But practically what happens though, especially in last mile networks, is you'll have, if you're not outsourcing your construction, and the most cost-effective way to build a network is to not outsource your construction. And so you would have teams that are building for you constantly. You'd be reticulating buildings. You'd be running streets in suburbs and those sorts of things. Typically, you've got a capex program where you've got staff dedicated to achieving that. When there's a break, the same people respond to the break. So you don't just have these engineers. You don't divide your organization. Say, all right, this guy is just going to sit around and do nothing and wait for a break to happen, and then run out with spares to fix it. So it's the one team that's running field operations, building for most of the time, and then repairing when it's not, which is why I think you're probably not going to look for the number that you're looking for in your business plan.
I'm getting it.
Yeah.
JP. Okay, sorry,
just
JP,
just
you.
to add to that, if you look from an investor's point of view, I think the question will be, and Simon, I agree with you, it's a maintenance portion and it's a permanent repair portion. So at your input cost right in the word go, and if you go and do it over your 20 years business case, I will always go and say, what percentage of your infrastructure will you go and replace due to permanent repairs? Not only to congestion or future growth, we're just talking about fixing the infrastructure which is damaged by a fire or anything like that. So in my head, if you look at experiences, different areas will have different percentages where activities are more relevant and more everyday trenching or widening of roads. For me, the percentage will be 2%. 2% of your total infrastructure over a 20-year period, you will replace for permanent repairs.
3%. I can.
2%.
Let's settle on it.
2. That's
2.
not negotiation.
Okay. JP, Vulatel is moving into building and owning
Yes.
infrastructure. That's sort of, if I understand correctly, that is sort of a slight deviation from Plessis and what Plessis was doing.
Wait, hold on, you're owning fiber now.
Not yet. Just listen to me.
What's the motivation? First of all, maybe just to clarify that question, if I say building, maybe you should define where's the thrust. Is it fiber to the home, fiber to the neighborhood? What exactly, if you want to own a portion of the network that you built, what's the plan going forward?
Well, and that's the big move that we decided we're going to do is, if you look at any investment, investor wants a balance sheet. Now, the construction business of doing installations or maintenance, where's your asset? There's no balance sheet. So we had to move to the area of owning infrastructure. And if you're going to look at the areas where we currently in metros and we as dense and a lot of people are building, our philosophy will be not to duplicate in those areas. And there's still so much build work left in the country. If you look at fiber to the towers, yes, we've done the metros, but now we're going to the rural areas, and that's exactly where we want to be. So there's, in my view, if you want to build 30 or 6,000 towers, you want to put them in fiber, you're in for 35,000 kilometers to go and build fiber. And that's the areas that we're targeting. We're not going to interfere with our customer at all. There must be an anchor tenant for that, and we will only maintain that infrastructure for them. So we're not interfering with our customers at all. There will be a customer request, and then we will deploy the infrastructure. The second portion of your question, if I got it correctly, is what are we going to do? Are we going to light it? Are we going to do layer 2? Yet again, it all depends on our customer requirement. If you look at smaller ISPs in these areas, absolutely. Smaller ISPs will find it difficult to be able to purchase dark fiber. And you will give them layer 2 services on these areas.
Severe. A very difficult question for you.
Sure.
You're going to Google it.
Yeah.
Putting you a little bit on the spot. CCOM
Yeah.
has now started to aggressively move into the retail space. I mean, if you look even into the ISP space in terms of, let's say, your building ready, or what is your product called? I've got it. Fiber ready building offering. So you, in essence, competing directly with your own customer, your wholesale customer. What is your view, and how do you see the conflict emanating from that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's different perspectives. So, so we had key anchor tenants in 2007. We delivered a service to them after building the cable system in 2009. And in 2015, so 6 or 7 years later, we decided to compete with them. But however, in 2010, those very same customers competed with us when they built competing cable systems. So who started this? Right? So it seems to be like a one-way discussion. This, right? Don't compete to me, but I'm going to definitely try and compete with you. Like our maintenance guy here who's going to build and compete with us. So I think it is all a matter of perspective. And I think important, though, more importantly, I think let's just look at market fundamentals. In 2007, the cost per meg of capacity, because it's not just about South Africa, it's about Mozambique, it's about Tanzania, it's about Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Djibouti, Ethiopia. Those are the countries that we serve as well. In 2007, the cost per megabit was $3,000 a meg, right? When we launched in 2009, we dropped it to about 500. And in 2015, I'd guess that it was probably, speaking, the guys in the audience would know better than me, but I'd still guess it was about, let's say, $40 or $50 a meg. Today, it's sitting around, sub $10 a meg in South Africa.
Yes.
If not sub 5, depending on the volume that you're buying at.
Yes.
So, having said that, I think we've done a great job dropping prices. But in 2015, at the start of 2015, when we wrote the business plan to start CCOM business, if you wanted a 100 meg service, business grade, not wholesale grade, a business grade into your office, you would pay 100,000 Rand a month. Now, that was the phenomenal job that our key anchor tenants had done, right? So when there is just gross inflation of price points and exorbitant margins, it does beg competition, and that's what we're all fundamentally doing here. We're challenging the incumbent because Telkom said nothing could replace DSL. It's impossible to replace this kind of network with fiber. And look, these people are doing it. In 2007, Telkom said there was no ways you could build another cable system, and we did it. The work that Simon has achieved is also paramount, because the cost of Joburg to Cape Town was the same as the cost of Cape Town to London. And that's the problem that they solved. So I think you've got to be careful before you start pointing fingers, guys.
No, I'm not pointing fingers. Just thinking about the inherent conflict of interest, maybe, yes, if you can call it that. To wrap up, so that we have enough time for the audience to grill you guys, hopefully only them. Simon, your view. I mean, first of all, let's just define a time period. Now, I've seen the small exposure that I had to this industry, that a time period of 3 years is like 30 years in any other industry. Where do you see the South African telco market, the fiber, specifically the fiber market, going in the next 5 years?
I must say, I think that the biggest driver of the fiber market going forward is going to be the wireless operators, or the MNOs. I think that 5G is really going to change the way that consumers consume data, taking away the enterprise for a moment. I do think that there's going to be different applications, there's going to be different requirements for data, and I think that data is going to grow significantly. And the fact that 5G requires so much more in terms of towers, in terms of antennas within a geographical area, means that there's going to have to be a lot more fiber in the ground to be able to run those applications. Otherwise, the latency is just not going to work. So I do think in the next few years, we will see a lot more antennas and a lot more fibered antennas. So I think the drive for fiber is still going to be there from a consumer point of view. From an enterprise point of view, I think that cloud computing is going to drive data up significantly. I think many companies now are starting to move their infrastructure out of their buildings and moving it into the cloud, whether it be hosted locally in South Africa or overseas. I think that cloud computing is going to drive a lot more bandwidth, and fiber's definitely the medium for that. And then from a home consumer point of view, I think that that television, Netflix, those kind of content providers are going to be going up the scale when it comes to 4K, 8K. It's a significant amount of data or bandwidth that's going to be required for that. So I think that the business case for fiber is certainly in the next 3 years still as good as it is, or as good as it was. And I think that fiber is going to be the medium to provide that. So I think the future is bright.
Just before we move on, the same question to Suvir. Who's going to be the losers in the next 3 years? Who's going to fall by the wayside?
I think that the kind of people that have taken a bit of a chance and built islands, and when I talk about islands, I mean fiber islands, whether it was maybe one suburb or one gated community. I think that they are going to struggle over a period of time, especially if they want to carry on growing. And I think that it's going to be people with balance sheets. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that, but certainly it's people with balance sheet that are going to be the winners in terms of long-term return on investment.
Thank you, Simon. Your view, Suvir?
Echo Simon's sentiments. I think the islands are going to be consolidated, and hopefully there's a reasonable point where people aren't losing their money on this. So they'll be consolidated in a fair way. I pray. But just maybe to add to that, I think fiber internet in itself is just going to become a commodity. It's just shifted from being a subsea commodity to a national commodity, then to a last mile commodity. So I think the people that are really going to win are going to be people that are able to embrace stuff on top of it. Now, I think in your home, you're probably going to start shifting towards it's going to always be a rather unsophisticated environment, and you're going to do some kind of home automation and security integration, and those sorts of things. That's not too sophisticated. But Simon's completely right. In the business environment, IT's changed. It's just completely changed. You don't need an IT guy anymore when you've got Amazon and you've got Google, those kinds of cloud services. What you need is someone to help you integrate all of those cloud services and a super fast internet connection. So those people that are able to add a little bit of services component to the super fast, cheap internet are going to perhaps have something that's a little bit more sustainable. So that's the way that I'd call it. I think other big losers are going to be the incumbents, without a doubt. Telkom bought BCX, and they destroyed BCX, and they destroyed Telkom, all at the same time. So that's going to shrink, and hopefully a lot of the value will shift towards us. So there's that. And also the huge telco model is going to undoubtedly be challenged. Glad to see that there's big changes around spectrum. And that's good for us as fiber players as well, as we hope to enable 5G, So that's awesome. The spectrum sharing, the spectrum leasing, those spectrum trading, those kinds of things are good, as well as the new spectrum, all heading in the right direction. And I think hopefully that will encourage some of the big boys to actually just focus on their core business and let us help them as independent infrastructure providers. Yeah.
2 point.
JP.
Frans, anybody can put fiber in the ground. What do you use your fiber for? And the dimensions of the fiber. And the point I'm trying to say is, in the olden days, we always just put the fiber in, 4 ducts, and there we go. But now you want to do FTTX, you want to do FTTB, and then we've got something lovely we call 5G. So how are you going to transport it? You're going to run out of fiber. So what I'm saying is, on that fiber infrastructure, you're going to have so many POPs. So points of presence. So let's make it, my view on that is, fiber is going to aggregate many, many more times and in much, much shorter intervals. Otherwise, you won't be able to utilize the fiber as you would currently put it in the ground. So fiber to cater for 5G, facilities, property. And you haven't started doing that already, I think we're going to have a problem in the market if we haven't realized that yet. So fiber going to smaller POPs, aggregating it and servicing the customers.
Thank you, JP. Thank you
You're
to
welcome.
all of you. I personally have enjoyed this conversation tremendously. I hope you did as well. I wish we had another hour because, I enjoyed it so much. Andre, maybe a few questions.
Yeah, Frans, thanks guys and your panel. Thank you very much. We are a bit pressed for time, but maybe just one question from my side. The business case is essentially a prediction of the future, written by people who have a stake in it and may have a certain amount of optimism and a certain amount of pessimism and perhaps a little bit of realism mixed into the pot. What has been the assumption that has come back and bitten you after you've done your business case and pulled the trigger? Just one thing that you can tell us you should have done better.
In my view that I've seen so far is the design of the deployment cost. When you deploy it, did you cater for all different aspects and dimensions of revenue streams in it? So your layered architecture that you designed from the word go or did not? So the design portion.
So plan, and then get it right.
Absolutely.
Severe?
Fortunately, I don't think this has come back to bite us yet, but I've seen this bite others. And that's, they build a network. They get an engineering team they chuck CapEx at, and those guys go out and build a network. And the sales guys are selling over there, right? So there's a complete lack of coordination between the sales team and the engineering
Coordination, orchestration, we heard about solutions to that earlier.
team. And then you fail to achieve your revenue density.
Yeah.
And that's when you get into a real crisis.
It's a delicate balance. Simon?
I think if I can turn it around and say what's the one thing that we should spend more time on, and I would say that reducing the cost of capital, or sorry, not the cost of capital, the cost of deploying the network. I think that you could spend more time trying to reduce the actual build cost, or understanding what kind of infrastructure sharing could you do to actually reduce that. I think that planning the network up front to understand that the less you spend in the beginning, the quicker your return on investment. And I think the more we could spend on something like that, I think the better.
Thank you. All right. Look, I'm going to request that you corner these guys in the break and give them your questions directly. But thank you very much for giving us your wisdom. It's been very interesting to hear your different points of view. Frans, thank you for coordinating.